Hey everyone, welcome to this month's edition of our market update. As I'm sure you've heard through various media outlets, things are buzzing again in Vancouver real estate. We just had November numbers come in and they are very strong. So without any further ado, let's take a look at those numbers. All right, so let's start off like we normally do by taking a look at our updated market activity chart for all of 2019. Here we can track month over month number of sales, number of listings, months of inventory, and the benchmark price. Now, one quick note, if you're looking at that bottom row, is that price tracking is actually for all property types in Greater Vancouver. So that means that that's taking into account detached properties, townhouses, and condos. Now, as you can imagine, because detached properties have taken quite a substantial hit over the last year and a bit here in Greater Vancouver, that number is a little bit skewed by the higher end product that's been dropping more in price, certainly than the lower end products such as condos. But I'll get more into that a little bit later in the update. Now, I'm not going to spend any time reviewing how the year started. I think we all know how that went. It was quite rough at the beginning. For me, the market really started to turn around in the summer months. Typically, as I think I've mentioned before, summers are quite slow in real estate. And when we hit this summer, that was kind of a sign for me that things are going to really pick up because we had quite a busy summer. It started in July. You'll notice by our months of inventory, we dipped back into a balanced market. Again, that's anything under 6 months of inventory. We had a 26% increase year over year in sales that month. It was followed by a strong August, relatively speaking, 16% increase year over year in sales. And that's when I kind of had a feeling that we're going to be in for a ride. Fall is typically the second busiest time of year in real estate. And this year it was definitely that. September and October both had approximately 45% sales increases each month over last year. And you can see by the months of inventory, especially in October, we went from being at the high end of a balanced market to, almost at that low end. Anything under 4 starts becoming a seller's market. Which brings us to last month, the month of November. So there was 2,498 sales in November. And if you look to the column on the right, that's the month over month percentage of change. And you can see there that was actually 12% lower than the month of October. Typically, you would look at that and say, oh, well, things have slowed down. But again, it's a matter of supply and demand, and that's why we look at months of inventory. So sales went down 12%. Then we look at the number of listings. Number of listings was 10,770. That is also a 12% decrease from the previous month, which means our months of inventory remained exactly the same. And that's really how we judge how busy the market is, supply and demand. So because all of you know that real estate is very seasonal, you're probably asking, well, how did this November compare to last year? Great question. And if we look at this slide here, this is the year over year sales numbers comparing November 2018 to 2019. And as you can see here, it was a huge jump. I mean, we had a very strong September, October, where we saw 45% increases. This is even higher. So we had a 55% increase in sales from a year ago. So you might be saying, yeah, well, but Marty, 2018 was like one of the worst years on record. What's 55% of hardly anything? Well, that's not very much. But, and I did mention this in previous updates, how, we have to temper our expectations because we've seen these increases in previous months, but we were still below the 10-year average of what sales numbers have historically been over the last 10 years. But if you have a look at where we are right now when it comes to the 10-year average, the November sales numbers were actually 4% above what we've seen in the last 10 years. And let's face it, we've had some pretty crazy high years here over the last 10. So being 4% above that is definitely a sign that it is busy. So you're probably wondering, what does that all mean when it comes to prices? And so let's go back to our chart for the entire year. And you'll notice at the beginning of the year, the benchmark was 1.02 million, and it was trending downwards up until the summer. Again, this is all property types, which includes detached properties, which have up until recently and still, for the most part, they're performing. That market is still quite weak compared to what it was historically, and so because that is the higher end, that's been dragging that average down slow. I would say condo prices have actually been quite stable since the spring for the most part. I mean, there's been slight variations here up and down, but for the most part things have been quite steady in that market. But the benchmark price kept going down because of detached properties. And now if you look at September to October, that is the first time we've seen an increase all year. And so what that tells me is that the detached market, the higher end stuff, even that's been stabilizing and slowly turning around. So what does that all mean in the grand scheme of things, you're probably wondering? Well, personally, I think we're going to have a very, very busy 2020. I think the market has generated a lot of momentum here over the last several months. I think that's going to carry through December and into the new year. Even early on, typically January, February is slow. I don't know if I see it slowing down that much. I mean, overall numbers, they're going to dip down seasonally. But in terms of the supply and demand, the months of inventory, I see it being quite strong and possibly starting to dip into a seller's market again by the spring. So if you're thinking about making any moves, you may want to, get ahead of that craziness that can happen where, you don't have time for inspections, etc. So definitely think about that. Also, if you're in the situation where you're trying to move up into a single family detached home, I definitely think it's a great time to consider that, to move up the property ladder, because single family detached homes have dropped the most out of all the property types over the last year and a bit. And so it's shrunk that gap between strata and single family. So you may want to take advantage of that, as that gap is lower than it's been in quite some time. If you have any questions, always feel free to contact me or put a comment down below. And that's it for me for this month. Want to wish you happy holidays, and we'll chat again in 2020.